Right, let's dive straight into the deep end with Parmenides. He kicks off by basically saying, hold on a second. Anything you can sense, anything that changes, forget about knowing it for sure. Why? Because according to him, it doesn't have a solid, unchanging identity. It's like trying to grab smoke. It just isn't there in a way that allows true knowledge. He immediately sets up this contrast between Noreen, which is about genuine conception or understanding, and what he calls acceptance, basically, just going along with what seems real because your senses tell you so. And those folks who buy into the sensible world, they're lost, wandering around blind. Now, Plato uses this language too, but here in Parmenides, it feels like he's specifically targeting the physicists of his day, especially the monist from Ionia. So why is change such a big deal for Parmenides? Think about it. If everything is made of one fundamental stuff, like water or air, and things change, then that one stuff must sometimes be hot and sometimes cold, sometimes solid and sometimes liquid. But how can the same thing be and not be what it is at the same time? That sounds like nonsense, right? It violates the most basic rule of thinking. Something either is or it isn't. You can't have it both ways. So Parmenides says, okay, forget the idea of one stuff changing. Let's try two. In Fragment 8, he explicitly proposes two primary substances. These guys don't change themselves. They just mix and separate to create all the different things we see and feel. This wasn't just Parmenides' own idea. It seems everyone else in the 5th century went with this pluralist approach. Even Aristotle notes that the monists struggled with explaining change without contradicting themselves, while the pluralists had an easier time. It's like saying, if you want to make a cake, you need flour and eggs, not just a magical blob of cakeness that transforms itself. Now, Parmenides doesn't just say senses are bad, though he does imply they're not the whole story. He calls his opponents the axiota phyla, literally, people without judgment. Normally, axiotos means something like indeterminate or endless, but here the context screams, they lack the ability to judge properly. How do we judge? By sticking to the fundamental rules of thought, the law of contradiction. Something is or is not. If you accept that a thing can both be and not be what it is, you've violated this rule, and you're officially without judgment. Parmenides links this failure of judgment directly to a misuse of the senses. He's not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. He's saying the senses are like tools. They can give you clues, but only if your mind is in charge, directing them and interpreting what they find. Think of it like using a telescope. The lens gathers light, but your brain figures out what you're looking at. Heraclitus, Epicharmus, Empedocles, they all echoed this idea. Senses are useful, but only when guided by reason. And Parmenides himself shows how it can work in 4:8, where he describes the sensible world in a way that avoids the contradictions he just criticized. So, how does Parmenides propose to talk about the sensible world without falling into the trap of saying something is and is not? Look at his example in Fair, 8 lines 57 to 58. He talks about light being the same and not the same as night. Wait, what? Isn't that exactly the kind of contradiction he just railed against? Not quite. He clarifies. When he says light is the same, he means it's identical to itself. When he says it's not the same, he means it's different from night. See the difference? He's acknowledging the relativity of our experience. Light and darkness are opposites, but he's doing it in a way that doesn't break the fundamental rule of identity. It's like saying, this apple is red and not red. Okay, that sounds weird, but if you mean red compared to itself, and not red compared to green, it makes sense. Parmenides is giving us a rational framework for talking about the changing world, even if he thinks that world isn't ultimately real in the way we perceive it. He even coins the term for those who rely solely on their senses, their thepotes, bewilderids. Empedocles picked up on this, telling us to behold love with our mind, not just stare at it with our eyes in amazement. Parmenides loves his metaphors, and here's a juicy one. He describes the path taken by those who follow the sensible way as a palintronos kaluthos, a journey that turns backwards. Where did he get this image? Straight from Homer. Zeus tells Iris, turn them back and do not let them meet me face to face. Parmenides is borrowing this to say that chasing after sensory experiences is ultimately futile. a path that leads nowhere or worse, back where you started. It's like running on a treadmill, you're moving, but you're not getting anywhere. This backward journey contrasts sharply with his own quest, his journey to the region of light, which is the path of reason leading towards true understanding. There's also a subtle nod to cyclical ideas about the cosmos, but the main point here is the futility of the common path versus the upward journey of philosophy. Callimachus used a similar image later, reinforcing its association with pointless activity. Now let's look at Fragment 6. This likely comes right after the critique of the sensible world in Fragment 5. It seems to explain that confusing the same and not the same, perhaps referring to theories like Anaximenes' rarefaction and condensation or Heraclitus's flux. The key here is vision. Clement, centuries later, saw this as a precursor to Christian ideas of spiritual sight. Empedocles, again, echoes Parmenides strongly here. Behold love with your mind. Don't just sit there staring in amazement with your eyes. Parmenides contrasts this mental gaze with the perceptual confusion and bewilderment of the common path. It's like the difference between reading a map and just wandering around looking at trees. Plato later picks up on this idea, using Parmenides' logic to argue that we can know things even when they're absent, because our minds can grasp the unchanging forms, or being itself, which underlies everything. This directly challenges Xenophane's skeptical view that we can only know what's present to our senses. Let's zoom in on this core from Fragment 6. Gaze steadily with your mind on even absent things as present. This is huge. The word steadiness, vivos, is key. It contrasts directly with Empedocles staring in amazement, tethepos. One is focused, the other is chaotic. Parmenides emphasizes the mind, nobo, here, suggesting that the power of thought allows us to grasp realities beyond what our senses can currently perceive. Think of Pythagoras, as Empedocles claims he could contemplate things far beyond his own time. The word even komos here acts like an adversative. In spite of the fact that these things are absent apeonda, our minds can still grasp them as if they were present pareonda. What does absent mean here? Not physically gone, but beyond the reach of our immediate senses. Parmenides is arguing for the power of intellectual intuition, a steady, unwavering focus of the mind that transcends the limitations of perception. Why can the mind achieve this steady vision of absent things? Parmenides argues it's because the mind doesn't treat being as something that disperses or gathers, like Anaximenes' air thinning out or Heraclitus' fire cooling down. If being were like that, it would be constantly changing, and our minds couldn't hold on to it steadily. The mind, by contemplating being directly, avoids this fragmentation. The verb apodichine, to sever, is crucial here. It implies the mind actively prevents itself from cutting being apart. Anaxagoras later borrowed this idea, saying the things in the one-world order are not separate from one another, nor cut off with an axe. Parmenides uses the term to on, being, for the first time as the subject of a predicate, and he asserts it cleaves to itself. This doesn't mean there's only one being yet. That comes later. It just means being isn't something that can expand or contract, because that would involve it separating from itself, which is impossible. It's fundamentally self-contained. Moving on to Fragment 7, Parmenides doubles down on his rejection of anything outside of being. He starts by addressing the things that are not. Remember the plural in Fragment 6. Here, the plural things that are not reinforces the idea that anything outside of being is unthinkable. This sets the stage for a direct attack on physical theories involving empty space or void. Aristotle specifically mentions this fragment in discussions about the 5th century debates on void. Who were the targets? Likely the Pythagoreans, who apparently believed void entered the cosmos with some infinite breadth to separate things, like articulating numbers. Parmenides, while never using the word kenon, consistently uses the opposite full. His argument seems to be that if there were a void, it would be nothing, and nothing cannot be a source or cause of anything. This view is echoed in Melissus, who argued similarly against void. Parmenides is also implicitly rejecting Leucippus, who later claimed that void itself had being. Parmenides had already shut the door on that possibility. Fragment 7 continues the warning against the sensible path, framing it as investigating what is not. How can you investigate something that doesn't exist? It's like trying to study a unicorn's jaw. Parmenides grounds this rejection firmly in the law of contradiction. Things that are not cannot be. The use of the pronoun you suggests some philosophers actually I tried to argue for the reality of non-beings, perhaps influenced by the Pythagorean ideas about void. Parmenides' exhortation is clear. Keep your thought away from this path. Why? Because habit pushes us onto the empirical way, the path of experience. This path, however, leads to unseeing senses and a noisy tongue, meaning our perceptions become unreliable and our language reflects confusion, not truth. Think about it. If you're constantly bombarded by sensory input without critical thought, you end up just reacting, not understanding. The alternative is noema, thought or intellect, which operates based on reason. The final instruction? Decide by discourse, using the controversial test, which is none other than the law of contradiction. Is it, or is it not? This is the bedrock of logical inquiry. And now we arrive at the heart of Parmenides' positive philosophy. Fragment 8. This massive section lays out the goddess's account of the real way, the journey of persuasion. It starts with a summary. Only one true path remains, marked by signs or landmarks. These aren't just random features. They are the essential characteristics of being, the only thing that truly is. This contrasts with the conventional marks assigned to physical things in his cosmology. The goddess then begins to list these signs. Being is ungenerated, imperishable, whole, unique, unmoved, perfect, and exists now altogether. The main body of the argument from lines 6 to 49 is where Parmenides builds this case deductively. Starting from the definition of being as what is and is not for not being, he derives all these attributes. It's like building a logical house. The foundation is the axiom of contradiction, and the walls and roof are the necessary consequences. This entire structure anticipates Aristotle's later analysis of scientific demonstration, though Parmenides focuses everything on being as the sole subject. It's a monumental achievement in philosophical reasoning. The goddess kicks off Fragment 8 by saying, only one story of the way is left. This refers back to the initial division of paths in Fragment 3. The remaining path is marked by signs, the scimitar. These aren't just arbitrary labels. They are the intrinsic properties of being itself, unlike the conventional characteristics we might assign to physical objects. The first sign she gives is fundamental. Being is ungenerated and imperishable. Notice how she uses being, tokon, as the subject of the verb is for the first time. This is a huge step. It means we can make meaningful statements about being. This directly refutes Xenophanes' earlier skepticism about knowing anything beyond the present moment. Parmenides seems to coin the term ageniton, ungenerated here, though anolathron, imperishable, might be older. The assertion that being is eternal and unchanging is the cornerstone of his metaphysics. The goddess continues listing the signs. Next up, being is entire, unique, unmoved, and perfect. Entire means it's complete, not lacking anything, not defective. Unique means there's only one of its kind. Unmoved doesn't mean lazy. It means it's eternally stable, exempt from all temporal change. Perfect means it lacks nothing, it's fully realized. Then she sharpens this further. Being is now all together. This isn't about reaching maturity over time. It's about all aspects of being existing simultaneously in a timeless present. Parmenides is denying past and future here, a radical claim that Plato later explores in the Timaeus, though Plato interprets now differently. Anaxagoras also used phrases about all things being together. The key is Parmenides' denial of temporal extension for being itself. It just is, fully and completely, right now. Okay, let's see how Parmenides proves that being is ungenerated and imperishable. First, where could it come from? Could it come from not being? No, because not being is nothing, and nothing can't be a source. It's like asking where did nothing come from? Nonsense! So if it came from something, it must have come from what is. But wait, Parmenides argues, what could cause it to come into being at this specific time rather than another? Nothing could. A cause needs to act, but nothing has no power to act. Therefore, the conclusion is unavoidable. Being either is entirely or it is entirely not. There's no middle ground, no possibility of something coming into existence alongside being. It's an all-or-nothing situation. Finally, he uses a judicial metaphor. Justice didn't unchain being to make it come to be or perish. The final verdict hinges on the fundamental choice, is it or is it not? Since not being is ruled out, being must be. Next proof, why is being indivisible? Parmenides reasons like this. If being were divisible, it would have parts, and those parts would differ from each other, wouldn't they? But we just established that being is all alike. It has no degrees of being, no higher or lower aspects. It's completely uniform. Furthermore, it's full of being, meaning there's nothing else mixed in with it. If there's nothing else, and everything is the same, then there's nothing to prevent it from uniting with itself. It's contiguous with itself everywhere. Therefore, the conclusion follows logically. Being is all united or indivisible. This isn't just about physical indivisibility, it's a logical point. Parmenides is saying that since being has no internal differences or variations, it cannot be broken down into distinct parts. It's a singular unified entity in its very essence. This foreshadows Aristotle's later insight that substance itself doesn't admit of degrees. Now for the proof of being's perfection and resulting immutability. Parmenides starts by saying being is not defective. Well, if it's not defective, it must be perfected or complete in itself. What does this perfection mean? It means being is determined by a limit, a boundary that defines it and keeps it separate from not being. This limit acts like huge fetters, binding being eternally, keeping itself same, always in the same state, by itself and perpetually in place. Think of Prometheus bound by Zeus. Parmenides uses similar imagery. This limit ensures that being is without beginning or end, changeless, unique, and solitary. It's a powerful image. Being is perfectly defined, perfectly contained, and therefore perfectly stable. The language is rich with Homeric echoes, and it strongly resonates with Xenophane's description of his God as remaining eternally in the same state. Here's a mind-bending conclusion from Fragment 8. Parmenides asserts, the same thing is for conceiving as is the cause of the thought conceived. What does this mean? He's saying that the object of our true thought, which we've identified as being, is identical with the perfection that makes it conceivable. It's like saying the reason we can understand mathematics is because mathematical truth is inherently logical and accessible to reason. Parmenides supports this with two arguments. First, any proposition that expresses genuine conceiving must use the verb is to refer to being. If the subject isn't being, it's just belief, not true knowledge. Second, since being is complete and unchanging, time itself cannot exist alongside it. Time is ruled out. Therefore, the only thing we can truly think about is being, and its very nature as perfect and unchanging is what enables that thought. The object of thought is the very perfection that causes the thought. It's a beautiful circularity. So, wrapping up Parmenides' core arguments from these fragments, he's built a powerful logical system. Reality for him boils down to one single unchanging, eternal whole, indivisible, perfect entity being. And the only way to know this reality is through reason, not through our unreliable senses. Crucially, the object of our thought, being, is also the very perfection that makes thought possible. It's a tightly integrated system where logic, ontology, and epistemology are deeply intertwined. This wasn't just a passing fancy. It laid the groundwork for much of later Greek philosophy, profoundly shaping Plato and setting the stage for Aristotle's own systematic approach to logic and metaphysics. Quite a legacy from these ancient verses.